Hey everybody, Stan Efferding here with Rhino's Rants. Be sure to hit subscribe for upcoming content and tune in to thecooler.com to get the world's only cooler within a cooler. Holds your pre-workout, a gallon of ice water, and your post-workout shake. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey everybody, Rhino here, the world's strongest pro bodybuilder, and this is the Power Project. That's right, I'm taking over for Mark Bell, and what better way to take over for the fattest head in the world than to talk about the fattest people in the world. But first, a word from my sponsor, that's me, and my cooler, the world's only cooler, holds a gallon of ice water and holds 2 shaker bottles inside. So you can keep your pre and post-workout drinks all together inside one ice-cold container. Professor Stephen McGarvey is an epidemiologist out of Brown University, and he's been studying the obesity epidemic on the Samoan Islands for over 2 decades. What happened in Samoa is quickly happening to the rest of the world, and there is no cure for the problem. My wife grew up in a small village in one of the remote British-ruled Samoan Islands in a town called Savaii. Her parents and her 12 brothers and sisters all slept in a 4-post hut with a thatched grass roof with banana leaves for blinds. They had a dirt floor over which they laid down reed mats to sleep. And they had a giant mosquito net that suspended down from the ceiling with a rope and covered the whole family at night. But it didn't keep the mosquitoes out, nor did it prevent the rats from biting their toes as they slept. They had no electricity or running water, and a dirty stream nearby provided water for them to drink. The bathroom was a hole dug in the ground covered by a box. They raised all their own food. Animals like pigs, chickens, and goats, a garden where they planted taro root and vegetables, trees with coconut and pineapple, and an ocean for fishing and harvesting seafood. They would wake up each morning and tend to their chores, feeding the animals and shoveling poop, picking weeds from the gardens, and then walk to school and come home to do the same. The oldest sister left school in the 3rd grade to stay home and care for the younger children and help with the land. Although they grew their own food, they had very little to eat because the food was also their only income. When food is your only resource, you ration consumption so you can sell those goods at the market. Food was a commodity. They didn't eat it for pleasure. They ate just enough to survive. Samoa had a vibrant marketplace where the families from the villages who had spent their days and weeks growing, fishing, and raising food would take it to the market to sell to be able to afford other necessities to live. Now, when I visited the marketplaces in the city of Apia in western Samoa, it was not uncommon to see 4 generations of family working together displaying and selling their goods. Very little was imported to the remote areas of the islands at that time. It was just too expensive for them to buy. Doctors' visits were rare, and the trip to the nearest city was long and too expensive to travel. Conditions were far from sanitary. The kids growing up endured routine bug bites, scratches, and stomach problems from the bacteria in the water. Apparently, it was normal for the kids to poop worms. Having said all of that, there was no obesity in their family, or amongst the neighboring villages. The community ate the food they raised and farmed: fish, eggs, chicken, goat's milk, vegetables, and fruit. There were no processed foods. No sugar, no flour, no vegetable oils, no trans fats, and they were all very active people. My wife's the healthiest person I've ever known. She rarely gets a cold, and if she does, it's gone in a day. She's never had a cavity, and her dentist is always commenting how strong and healthy her teeth and gums are. As a side note, I read a study recently that said kids raised on farms have better immune systems and suffer fewer of the common maladies such as colds, infections, and asthma as those raised in the city. The conclusion being drawn was that the exposure to the larger variety of bacteria growing up created a stronger immune system. So stop following your kids around with bleach wipes. Now, when my wife was 10 years old, their whole family moved to American Samoa. They lived much the same way, except they were working the land for another family that owned the farm. Food was still rationed as a commodity. Living conditions were the same for their family, and commerce was still a combination of barter and sale at the local marketplace. One of her brothers and his 7 children still live very much the same today as they did growing up, in a 4-post hut with a dirt floor and an outhouse. I visited her brother and his family in American Samoa, and we sat on the dirt floor and on top of the reed mats they used for sleeping, and all the children spoke about coming to America someday. The main difference between American Samoa at the time was the existence of a wealthier families and a class of elite religious leaders and politicians. There was also the availability of cheap imported foods, such as mayonnaise and vegetable oils for frying and flour and sugar for baking, as well as many processed foods. It became more difficult to sell much of the foods that they raised on the island, and those foods realized smaller returns as a result of competing with cheaper imports. The other difference was obesity. The wealthy families and their kids who could afford the cheap, imported, high-calorie processed foods were largely obese. Unfortunately, within that isolated island community, obesity was viewed as a sign of wealth. It was revered and it was aspired towards. It's important to understand something about obesity trends worldwide and follow along, because an interesting dynamic occurred in American Samoa, causing a perfect storm, if you will, that contributed them to be the fattest population on the planet. And don't take offense to my using the term fat. I realize it carries a negative connotation as a physical descriptor, whereas obesity is more of a medical term. I mean no disrespect. This is a very serious problem. Obesity worldwide shares a common theme. Wealthier countries have a higher incidence of obesity, which is generally agreed to be the result of greater access to more affordable calorie-dense foods, coupled with a sedentary lifestyle. Now, within a single wealthy country, such as the United States, another dynamic exists whereby poor people have a higher percentage of obesity as a group than wealthier people. And this is largely attributed to education level. College graduates tend to earn more, and they also tend to pay more attention to diet and exercise, and have better access to health care. American Samoa was different. Much of the wealthy class in Samoa were not knowledgeable about obesity-related diseases, and being fat was a sign of wealth. Their obesity rates therefore skyrocketed. Since American Samoa was still a poor country, the poor people did not have the same problem with obesity because they didn't have access to the cheap, high-calorie foods, and they had to work harder every day to create the sustenance needed to eat and sell. Now that is until food stamps were introduced to the island. Now this is one thing that wasn't mentioned in the Brown University article that I feel really poured fuel on the obesity epidemic of the poor people in American Samoa. And it accelerated them ahead of the British-ruled Isle of Western Samoa, where food stamps didn't exist. Almost overnight, the poor people of American Samoa went from being food poor to being food rich. The already diminishing marketplace was already essentially wiped out with the introduction of those cheap foods and the food stamps. Locally grown food ceased to have any value because it couldn't be sold. I'm not making any political assertions here, and I'm not opposed to food stamps. I think they serve a very necessary purpose in our society for families and children that have fallen on hard times. And to be honest, I'd rather see 1 million obese people than one hungry child. Now, there's also plenty of studies performed in the United States showing comparable obesity rates between food stamp recipients and non-recipients in the same poor community. But I am saying we should pay attention to the necessary education needed within that vulnerable community. Now, my wife's family suffered the same fate as the rest of the island's poor. They no longer farmed, they became more sedentary, and their father rapidly became obese and ultimately died from complications of diabetes. American Samoa is still a poor and isolated community, but they do have plenty of cheap, high-calorie imported foods. One of the few two-story buildings on the island is McDonald's, which is open 24 hours and it's always busy. That little walk down memory lane is certainly interesting, but what do we do about it? What do we do to slow this runaway obesity epidemic? What the people of Samoa have taught us is something we already know. When you eat more and move less, you will increase the incidence of obesity and obesity-related diseases. And the only way to solve that problem is to move more and eat less. Now, while the diet and exercise industry argues about all sorts of irrelevant matters, we're leaving behind the people that need the help the most. If we're not confusing them with complicated diet programs and demonizing entire food groups, or creating phantom food disorders, then we're hurting them with over-aggressive, injury-prone exercise programs or ineffective quick-fix isolation exercises promising 10-minute results. Or we're providing them false hope with fake claims about superfoods and supplements, or harming them with prescription medications that simply mask the symptoms and don't address the real cause of the problem. I think you set people up for failure when you overcomplicate the process. I think you set people up for failure when you don't acknowledge the priorities and spend too much time confusing them with details. I think you set people up for failure when you try and change too many of their habits and behaviors in too drastic a fashion, or when you ask them to do things they absolutely hate doing or eat things they hate eating. So does an effective solution even exist? We can't rely on our government to help us out of this mess. They're the ones that gave us the trans fats disaster. They're the ones that gave us sugar-laden, non-fat chocolate milk in schools and called ketchup a vegetable. We can't turn to self-serving politicians who grandstand for their own benefit. They're all attorneys and Ivy League elitists, and their solution to every problem is more laws, more taxes, more layers of bureaucracy, and more condescending "we know what's best for you" speeches while they drink, smoke, overeat, and don't exercise. Their ilk only ever has two ideas: prohibition and taxation. Prohibition has never worked. Filled with alcohol, filled with drugs, and it will never work with food. Food restrictions like downsizing big gulps or taxing sodas, albeit presumably well-meaning, is condescending, ineffective, and unproductive. Mexico already tried this through taxation on soda, and it had no effect on the obesity problem in Mexico. They just replaced one sugar drink with another. Taxation is just a money grab, disguised as a health initiative, yet another attempt to extort money from companies to put into the government coffers and create more bureaucracy while doing nothing to impact the actual problem. And I don't think these companies are without blame. I think they're producing garbage. But those are the freedoms that we afford ourselves as Americans, to make our own choices and buy the products that we like, and the companies respond by providing the products that we buy. Besides, what we're finding out over time is that it's less and less about what we eat and more about how much we eat that's of primary importance. I'm sure everyone's heard of the Super Size Me movie, where a filmmaker ate 5,000 calories a day at McDonald's and didn't exercise, and he gained 27 pounds in a month and got sick. Shocker. But fewer people know about the teacher in Iowa who ate at McDonald's every day for 90 days, but restricted his daily intake to just 2,000 calories and walked for 45 minutes a day. He lost 37 pounds and improved his cholesterol and blood sugars. A similar experiment by a nutrition professor at Kansas State provided equally positive results from a diet of mainly processed foods eaten at 7-Eleven. Now, you can get fat eating anything. Even the Mediterranean diet can make you fat if you eat too much cheese and nuts and never exercise. It's about how much you eat, first and foremost. I'd never recommend a McDonald's or 7-Eleven diet, but I'd be negligent not to recognize that compliance and calories are more important than food quality. Besides, if you attempt to legislate things like soda consumption, where do you stop? Fruit juices are loaded with sugar, and skim milk has more sugar than a peanut butter cup. And is it just sugar? What about calories in general? The culprits are everywhere. Eating the beef ribs at Cheesecake Factory will cost you 2,500 calories, and bacon and waffles breakfast is 2,000 calories. Are you going to legislate those choices off the menu? And what about Dunkin' Donuts and Krispy Kreme? Should we close down every bakery and outlaw every deep fryer until everyone's eating government-authorized and produced Soylent Green? I'm all for it, except for the inconvenient Orwellian utopia aspect to the whole thing. How about the vegetable oil industry? The deep fat fryers full of canola oil in every fast food place in the country. That's the real poison that's killing us. But who am I, and who is the government to mandate what you can and cannot eat, whether you have a weight problem or not? The idea that you can legislate behavior, particularly consumption of food, is a red herring. The real problem is education, and any time spent legislating big gulps and supersized meals is time not spent focusing on the real problem. Besides, doesn't it seem hypocritical to attempt to implement legislation to restrict the size of sodas, but not intercede in the food choices of the most vulnerable population that depends on food stamps? As a nation, we used to do that. When I was 12 years old, I worked at 7-Eleven, and there used to be restrictions that attempted to prevent food stamp users from buying unhealthy foods such as sugar cereals, candy, and soda. But that was deemed to be an overreach of individual rights, not because politicians don't like to overreach, but because they received millions of dollars in campaign contributions from the companies that were selling this garbage. Once again, we're back to education. We're back to informing people about the health risks of obesity and the need to watch their total caloric intake. Move more and eat less. Everybody still wants to play pin the tail on the donkey and start a war. But before you wage a war, you have to declare an enemy. Unfortunately, in the war on obesity, the enemy is also the victim. You're at war with yourself. The source of the problem is also the only solution. Now, Americanization is not about McDonald's or Coca-Cola. Americanization is about wealth and excess. It's about convenience and comfort. It's about eating more and moving less. That's the challenge that lies ahead. It's far more complex than food. It's about changing behavior. Our responsibility as part of this health and fitness industry is to help educate and motivate those that struggle with obesity. The desire to feel better and live longer. Nobody wants to be shamed or judged or patronized, and many obese people avoid seeking help for fear of being made to feel stupid or looked down upon. Most people fail not because their diet and exercise program doesn't work. The fact is, most diet and exercise programs work when they're strictly adhered to. Now, most people fail due to lack of compliance. They simply stop adhering to the program. They stop exercising and start eating more calories. People always ask me, what's the best exercise? And my answer is always the same, the one you'll do. And people always ask me, what's the best diet? And my answer is always the same, the one you'll follow. I prefer to ask people what exercises they enjoy doing and what foods they like to eat, when they like to eat, where they like to eat, and then simply design a diet and exercise program that includes their choices and just help keep track of compliance and results. It's a calorie equation at the end of the day. I know certain foods fill you up for longer, and others have more calories and are easier to eat in excess. But we have to start somewhere, and that somewhere is with the priorities. The first most important thing is to create a caloric deficit, ideally with a combination of calorie restriction and exercise. Now, when it comes to exercise, I know certain exercises burn more calories than others, but they only burn those calories if you're actually doing the exercise. And if you hate going to the gym, that's a terrible program to design for someone. Just because you and I enjoy lifting weights doesn't mean everyone does. You have to find the kinds of exercises that they will do consistently, which will lead to long-term results. I don't think the most successful trainers for the obese population are those that know the most about diet, such as a dietitian, or the most about exercise, such as an exercise science major. I think the most successful trainers are those that can create and motivate and inspire. The ones that can make sustainable lifestyle changes to ensure compliance and consistency. Good trainers are like good parents or good teachers. They're the ones that always stay a step ahead so the kids don't become stagnant. They stay interested and motivated and continue to grow and develop and achieve their goals. Personal trainers like to talk about all the professional athletes that they've trained, and they wear it as a badge of honor when one of those athletes succeed. But the fact is, those are the easiest people to train. Those are the genetically more gifted people. Those are the people that are already motivated. They're already more disciplined and consistent. Training athletes is easy by comparison. Now, it's not that losing weight is difficult in the sense that calculus or organic chemistry may be difficult. The recipe is simple. Move more, eat less. The process is made to be way overcomplicated by those in the industry trying to sell shit. The real challenge is compliance. Now, don't get me wrong, losing weight will hurt, for lack of a better word. Not because it requires eating anything horrible or doing any painful exercises, but because it will absolutely require you to be hungry. And hunger for most people is painful. I call it hangry. Your body makes it that way on purpose. Anytime you want to lose weight, you have to maintain a calorie deficit. And when you do that, your body thinks you're starving. And it will make you uncomfortably hungry, and it will fight you every step of the way. even by reducing the number of calories that you burn. Changing bad habits is hard. Greg Nuckols talked about this recently. Bad habits make you feel good right away, like eating lots of delicious food. So we do it over and over again. Short-term gain, long-term pain. Good habits require short-term pain for long-term gain, such as battling hunger or forcing yourself to exercise when you get home from work, when all you want to do is take a nap. And people eat too much for any number of reasons, the most challenging of which are emotional and mental. People exercise too little for a number of reasons. One might be a sedentary job, such as a long-haul truck driver. And while it's not an excuse, we certainly have to recognize that some people have to jump over higher hurdles, and some people have to work harder and suffer more to achieve their goals. People shouldn't get frustrated when they fail. That's the reality of the problem. Even those that succeed will fail many times along the way. Now, I know there's a lot of strong opinions about The Biggest Loser and the recent research about the contestants gaining their weight back. I know people are frustrated with the over-aggressive training and the starvation diet. I know they're concerned with the fact that studies show these people had a decrease in their metabolism that still hasn't rebounded even after they've gained all the weight back. The real takeaway, without diving into a position on the specifics, is that there are no short-term solutions, and there is no finish line. It has to be a sustainable lifestyle, not a short-term goal. It wasn't just how hard they trained or how little they ate. The bigger problem is that it was unsustainable. Nobody can starve themselves that much for that long or train that hard all the time. There has to be a method by which people can move more and eat less that's consistent with a balanced lifestyle that includes work, family, and fun. It's also important to point out that these people competing on The Biggest Loser are not the average American. These people have a much more difficult time. It's easier for them to gain weight, it's harder for them to lose weight. Just because you can lose weight pretty easily doesn't mean everyone can. Much the same way not everyone who lifts weights is going to be Phil Heath, no matter how hard they work. Many obese people do have to work much harder to maintain a healthy body weight. They do have to eat less and exercise more consistently for longer periods of time. So their struggle is not your struggle. What's easy for you may not be easy to others. What you can do in 2 weeks might take others 2 months or 2 years. The solution remains the same. Eat less, move more. But their success will require a lifelong commitment. Now, Brown University is already trying to address the obesity epidemic in Samoa with the only method that actually works: education. They've sent caseworkers into many communities on the island to work with families there, educating them about nutrition, diabetes, and heart disease. And they've been realizing success with the program. Samoans are a big people with even bigger hearts. They come together as a community to celebrate. They are an island nation, one giant family. They're my family, my wife, my own children. They shouldn't suffer from obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. They should live long and prosperous lives. They would help anyone in need, and they deserve our help. The same is true here in America, where our families and friends are suffering from obesity and deserve help. As a community of health professionals, we need to stop confusing people. Stop blaming and shaming people. Stop stealing from them. Stop selling them quick fixes and false hopes. Stop with all the pills, powders, and potions. Stop with the prescriptions. Stop hurting and start helping. Well, that's my rant, and as always, thanks for listening.
Hey, thanks again for listening. Hit subscribe for future rants and click the link in the description for more information, and check out thecooler.com.